Hey there, I'm Scott McClay. This is Counting the Cost on Times of USA, your look at the world of business and economics. The Middle East conflict has devastated Iran's economy, but soaring oil revenues have brought in much-needed cash. So, is the war weakening the Iranian regime or actually strengthening it? The U.S. has ramped up pressure on Tehran, but who stands to lose most from tensions in the Strait of Hormuz? Is it forcing Iran toward negotiations, or can it find a way around it? Sanctions relief and access to billions in frozen funds could be a lifeline to Iran's economy. But will Tehran get what it needs? And if not, what does that mean for millions of Iranians? The U.S. has spent decades trying to squeeze Iran economically, but 6 weeks into the Middle East conflict, Tehran is still standing. American and Israeli strikes on infrastructure, industry, and trade have damaged Iran's sanctioned economy even further. But oil revenues have kept flowing, giving the regime a financial cushion. The Strait of Hormuz is now at the center of this economic battle. Whoever controls it controls the pressure. At the negotiating table, sanctions relief, billions in frozen assets, and war reparations are all at stake. Meanwhile, millions of Iranians are bearing the brunt of inflation, shortages, and a collapsing currency. Devastation on one side, resilience on the other, which runs out first, may shape what comes next. Ferdia Carr reports. After a month of U.S. and Israeli bombs hitting critical infrastructure, causing power outages, internet blackouts, and shutting down regular life, Iranians face major economic disruption. But even before the shock delivered by the war, Iran's economic outlook was bleak. As one of the most sanctioned countries for nearly 5 decades, Iran's economy has been squeezed. Inflation was at more than 42% in December. The official unemployment rate is above 8%, though unofficial projections are higher. The value of the Iranian rial has plunged, sitting at around 1.5 million to the dollar. The affordability crisis for regular Iranians was a major driving factor in protests in January, some of the largest in the country since the 1979 revolution. But while Iran's wartime economy is a major challenge for the government, Iran's military has been resilient. Unlike a conventional military branch, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRG, has direct stakes across the country's economy in agriculture, food production, and manufacturing. The group owns one of Iran's largest construction and engineering conglomerates. The IRG is also widely reported to control a large share of Iran's oil economy, running so-called shadow fleets to evade sanctions and shell companies to sell oil mostly to China. As other areas of Iran's economy are constrained, oil prices have risen sharply, around 30% since the war began in February. The increase in revenue has been a lifeline for Iran and the Revolutionary Guards. Exports have remained close to pre-war levels, around 1.5 million barrels a day, and the IRG's effective control of shipping through the Strait of Hormuz is a potential major source of revenue. While Iran's parliament is yet to formalize a toll regime, maritime journal Lloyd's List reports several vessels have made payments for passage. All that faces being undercut by the naval blockade of Iran's ports announced by U.S. President Donald Trump on April 13th. He's pledged to stop all vessels going to and from Iranian ports and to block tankers that pay toll fees to Iran. If successful, it will squeeze funding for Iran's military and hit its wider economy. The U.S. blockade also risks further restricting global oil supplies, affecting economies around the world. And with Iran demanding any peace settlement must include reparations and control over the Strait of Hormuz, a return to the status quo in the region is anything but certain. Ferdia Carr, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost. To discuss this further, we are joined by our panel of experts. From Hamburg, Germany, Mohammad Reza Farsanagan, Professor of Economics of the Middle East at Marburg University. In Washington, D.C., Paulo Fontoura, President of the Global Policy Institute. And in Doha, Nikolai Kazanov, Research Associate Professor at the Gulf Studies Center at Qatar University. I should mention before we begin that we are having this discussion while there appear to be positive signs that the U.S. and Iran could resume talks, but anything could have happened by the time you are watching this. Muhammad, the US-Israeli bombing campaign has gone after steel factories, aluminum producers, airports, ports, bridges, railways, and of course oil and gas facilities. Can you give us a sense of the scale of damage we are seeing in Iran right now? As you mentioned, many infrastructures in Iran have been affected, civilian and military. Iran was still able to transit its oil to international markets, mainly to China, at 1.5 million barrels per day. Estimations from Iranian authorities put the damage from military attacks on infrastructure at close to $300 billion US. These are direct damages and do not account for human, social, or environmental costs, nor do they include the cost of the internet shutdown, now almost 48 days, which is significantly affecting small businesses and the civilian economy. Furthermore, the sanctions in place before the war are still there and continue to impose substantial costs on Iran. Paulo, a Undevelopment Program report found that the number of people living below $8.3 per day could increase by 3.5 to 4.1 million, potentially raising Iran's overall poverty rate to as high as 41%. Is that what the Americans and Israelis were trying to achieve with this war? Not really. The Americans and Israelis want the destruction, the obliteration, as we often hear of the Iranian regime. Let's not forget the initial pitch for this large-scale attack on Iran was, "We have a golden opportunity to decapitate the regime. Once that is done, Iran will change, potentially become a democracy." None of this happened. The American objective is not to create famine in Iran, but the regime is shielded in large measure from the economic pain suffered by the civilian population. As long as they have enough money to pay the URG, the militias, and keep the infrastructure of government going, they're okay. The blockade will damage all of Iran, but it will take months to take full effect. There is certainly an element of information war in President Trump's statements. As of now, we do see serious damage to Iran's economic infrastructure, but Iran's economy has also demonstrated substantial durability, partly fueled by high oil prices and previously accumulated reserves. Iran actually received far more income from oil exports in March than it did a year ago. That said, time is definitely not playing in Iran's favor. If the Hormuz blockade on the American side lasts more than a couple of months, Trump's words could indeed prove true. According to different estimations, Iran has no more than roughly 2 months before it will really start feeling the effects, with oil output potentially falling to as low as 500,000 barrels a day in a worst-case scenario. Oil exports are the backbone of Iran's economy, part of a sea trade that powers around 90% of the economy, funding government spending, the military, and helping to withstand sanctions. Oil and gas tankers rely heavily on one route, the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical shipping lanes on Earth. When the US and Israel began bombing Iran at the end of February, Iran immediately blocked ships from entering the strait, but also increased its own exports. From the 15th of March to the 14th of April, Iran exported 55.2 million barrels of oil. At around $90 a barrel, that amounts to nearly $5 billion US, a 40% increase over pre-war levels. But on April 12th, U.S. Central Command announced it would blockade all Iranian ports to sharply restrict oil exports. This could impact not only the economy but also the military and the Revolutionary Guards. Reuters reported in 2024 that the URG controls up to 50% of Iran's oil exports. Experts say Iran may have some workarounds storing oil until routes reopen, using the direct freight railway between China's Xi'an and Iran's Abayan dry port, or deploying ghost ships with transponders switched off. But if exports stop, Iran's economy may feel it fast. And if Hormuz stays closed, the world feels it too. Laura Khan for Counting the Cost, Al Jazeera. If the Americans insist on a full blockade, the effects could be felt in Iran sooner than 6 months. Iran exports from the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. That means no foreign exchange revenues if those routes are closed. And 90% of Iran's imports and exports move through the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman. Even for non-oil trade, it's around 70%. Iran is heavily dependent on food imports, about 30% of its merchandise imports, which is very high compared to neighboring countries. Alternative routes via the Caspian Sea have far more limited capacity. The IMF is projecting inflation of 70% in Iran for 2026, and GDP is expected to decline by around -6%.